If you're watching this video, it's because either you're an addict or you know someone who is addicted to something. And what I wanted to do today is to share with you some of the techniques that you can use to help cure this addiction, whether it's your own or whether you're trying to help someone else. So one of the first techniques we're going to look at is by a person called Tony Robbins. And what Tony Robbins did was he took someone, for example, who was addicted to smoking. What he did is he put them in a room and he said, okay, light one up. This person would have a cigarette. He'd be like, okay, now take another one, light it in your mouth, and start smoking both of them. What he would do, he would force people to smoke a ton of cigarettes in the room with him until they had so much pain, they said never again. You can imagine them burning through 20 fags. Like all of that pain built up upon them was enough, and then they decided to quit. And obviously this is somewhat unsustainable. I'm not saying for if you're an alcoholic to go out and drink as much booze as possible and then you're going to be cured because of the pain the next day. Because many of us have had days where we've said, well, I'm never going to drink alcohol again. But for some addictions, allowing them to understand what it is that will happen to them if the pain gets too high. If the smoking is understanding what will happen to your lungs. Maybe it's understanding how the food is going to affect you. But stacking up on that pain gives you leverage. And that leverage will help someone change. So that's one of the first techniques. The next was an experiment done by Bruce Alexander in 2010. And he did this with rats. And he was looking at what is it that makes us get addicted to something. So he took a rat and he put it in just a box, and it could either choose from water, plain water, or water with heroin. And when they were by themselves, almost 100% of the rats would go for the heroin water. But he was confused, like, well, why is this when you're by yourself that this happens? So he did another experiment called the rat park experiment. So he had a bunch of rats and they could choose from the same water, either it just being water by itself or water with heroin. And it turned out that none of the rats took the heroin water. Now, why is that? That's because they have a connection. Often people do substances because they're lacking a connection in their life. Once you actually create a connection and a bond with others, that's where the addiction breaks, because you don't need something to stimulate you. But maybe you're thinking this is just with rats. Well, let's look at the Vietnam War. Think about all the Americans that were addicted to cocaine. 20% of them, 20% of the Americans in the army were addicted to cocaine. When they came back, 95% of them recovered. Now, how is that? Usually if someone starts, they can't stop because they're addicted. No, it's because they had that connection. We are in a society where often addictive drugs, and if you're addicted to alcohol and anything like that, you're put in rehab, you're put by yourself and you're isolated and people look at you badly and you are cut off from this connection. And this is clearly not the way forward. If you look at Portugal in 2001, they started to do an entirely different approach for addictions, and they tried to reintegrate them into society by giving them a purpose, giving them something to connect to and wake up towards. And if you look at Portugal now, it's got the lowest drug rate of almost any country because of a completely new way of thinking. So if you're an addict out there, or if you're looking to help an addict, connect with them. You need to build that connection, because often it's in isolation where people turn to something else to connect with. Now, the final thing is many people can never stop. So they need to be doing something constantly. For many people that are overweight out there, the reason that they're overweight is because when they're bored, they eat. For people that smoke cigarettes, sometimes they're bored and they'll smoke a cigarette. For people that are constantly addicted to their phones, we're in a world where we are all addicted to our phones. If you look at a restaurant, you can be sitting there and if you look across the table, someone will go to the toilet, and immediately what happens is the other person will pick up their phone and start looking at it. Why is that? Why can't they just sit there? Because we've become impatient as a world. We need to be constantly distracted by these external circumstances. We are all addicted, whether it's a good addiction or a bad addiction. So to be able to stop that, we need to be able to stop and think and just be present. Because can you imagine if you could just be happy without anything, just by yourself in a room? Because most of us, we need these external things, which is why we're drawn to alcohol, which is why people are drawn to cigarettes, to drugs, and all these other types of addictions. Because we're uncomfortable sitting by ourselves. We're uncomfortable just being alone and isolated by ourselves. So what can you do? It's understanding that one of the biggest challenges is actually dealing with the internal demons that you have of being by yourself. So a fantastic exercise is see if you can be by yourself for an hour, not doing anything, not trying to read a book, not trying to constantly distract yourself. I mean, I had this problem. I would constantly read, constantly look up information, and I'd never stop. Why? Because I found it too difficult. The question to you is, what would happen if you stopped? That's where you start to uncover some things about yourself that previously you've been distracting yourself from. A lot of people who are unhappy turn to drugs because they don't want to face reality when they're by themselves and they actually start to think. So I've given you a few methods today on how you can tackle addiction and how you can help someone else with addiction. So please comment below if you have any other questions, and thank you.